The morning in San Francisco began cold and grey. Emily pulled her old wool cardigan closer around her and pushed open the heavy iron gate of the Anderson estate. Even before she set foot on the gravel path, she could feel dozens of eyes watching her, judging her in silence. No one needed to say a word. She saw the way a curtain moved in the large upstairs window and heard a quiet chuckle from somewhere behind the hedge. The Andersons were already gathering for what promised to be a long, uncomfortable day. As Emily stepped carefully onto the porch, her faded dress brushing against her legs, two women whispered near the doorway. One looked her up and down, and the other made a face. She pretended not to notice, but in her chest, her heart was pounding. Inside, the main hall was bright with the shine of crystal glasses and diamond earrings. The Anderson heirs, the people Emily had known only in stories, crowded. Together, all in elegant black, each holding a flute of champagne with a practiced hand. No one offered Emily a seat or even a smile. She hovered near the door, invisible but all too aware that every glance and every hush was about her, an outsider who didn't belong in their world. As laughter echoed off the marble floors, Emily stood quietly by the tall window, her hands clenched around the worn strap of her handbag. The Anderson cousins exchanged knowing looks and sharp whispers slid through the air like tiny arrows. Someone let out a pointed snicker, another clinked a glass for emphasis, all the while pretending she did not exist. Emily's stomach twisted with each snide comment, but she stayed rooted in place, refusing to let these people see how much they rattled her. She kept her gaze steady, silently watching the crowd. From the grand piano where Eleanor Anderson sipped her drink with thinly veiled amusement, to the cluster by the fireplace, older men in dark suits, their smiles brittle and eyes cold, Emily studied them all. She caught the way Olivia, the family matriarch, appraised her like a stain on an otherwise perfect rug. Every gesture and smirk went straight into Emily's memory, a catalogue of arrogance and cruelty tucked beneath the polished surface of this old money world. Though nobody bothered to include her in the conversation, her quiet wasn't submission. It was her own brand of resistance. Emily stood firm, head up, refusing to let their contempt shrink her any further, even as their words stung like icy rain. It was Matthew, known for his flashy ties and louder mouth, who finally broke the tension. He grinned, showing off a row of perfect teeth, and made a joke at Emily's expense loud enough for the entire room to hear. His words painted her as just another servant who had wandered in by mistake. Laughter bubbled up around the hall, bouncing from cousin to cousin, each person eager to prove they belonged on the inside of the family joke. Emily felt the mocking ripple over her, thick as fog, rolling in from the bay. As the laughter faded, Samantha glided across the floor. She wore a bold red dress that caught the light and every eye as she passed. Without warning, Samantha reached out and pinched the fabric of Emily's weary cardigan between her sharp fingers, holding it up for everyone to see. The movement was casual, almost as if she were examining a museum relic that did not quite fit the exhibit. The message was clear and everyone caught it. More than one smirk flashed around the room, and a few people even clapped quietly, as if Samantha's pettiness was some act worth applauding. Inside, Emily's cheeks burned, but she stayed still, her chin lifting ever so slightly, refusing to be reduced by the venom in their laughter. Just as Emily tried to center herself, Rachel, always eager for attention and well-known online for sharing every moment, pulled out her phone. In one smooth motion, Rachel started filming, capturing Samantha still holding onto Emily's cardigan while the crowd snickered. She didn't hesitate, adding a sarcastic caption before posting the video straight to her followers on 3 different platforms. In moments, the scene was out there, being watched and commented on by strangers across the city and probably beyond. The familiar ping of notifications and digital laughter started to mix with the real laughter echoing through the hall. For Emily, the humiliation felt endless, as if it no longer fit just in these four walls, but was growing in all directions. Rachel's video picked up steam. Friends of the family started chiming in online, while some of the younger cousins kept checking their screens and whispering updates to each other, delighting in every new, cruel message. Emily could only imagine what was being said out there, that she looked out of place, that she didn't fit in, that she was not worthy of being. At the Anderson estate, not one person bothered to pull her aside and ask why she had come or who she was to the family. They were too busy turning her discomfort into a joke for everyone to enjoy. As the video continued its loop online, Brian, one of the more distant cousins who always looked for ways to feel important, jumped on the moment. Loud enough for everyone to hear, he joked that Emily must be here hoping for a handout, as if she was just another person trying to get lucky at someone else's expense. The laughter that followed was louder than before, and someone even raised their glass. In a mock toast to Brian's sharp sense of humor, the crowd near the fireplace joined in, clinking their champagne and nodding as if they were celebrating some inside joke. Emily felt every word like another shove, as if they wanted to see how far they could push her before she broke. Still, she didn't react. Not a tear, not a blush of anger, not even a dropped gaze. She stood steady, her hands clasped tight but held low. The look in her eyes wasn't desperate but calm and steady, a quiet kind of strength that seemed to bother the cousins even more than if she had collapsed in tears. Her silence made some of them exchange uneasy glances. They had expected her to shrink away, to retreat in shame, but instead, her quietness made them all feel a bit exposed, as if the joke had suddenly slipped out of their control. As the tension thickened in the Anderson estate's grand hall, two figures broke from the crowd and made their way toward Emily. George and Linda, a married couple known in San Francisco's business circles for both their influence and their cold demeanor, stopped right in front of her. George crossed his arms and asked why she was even in the room, his voice carrying through the crowd so that even those at the far end of the hall could hear. Linda, standing at his side with perfect posture, chimed in as well, demanding to know if Emily had any real claim to be at the reading of the will, or if she was just hoping to cause trouble. Everyone in the room seemed to freeze. The laughter and whispers stopped, replaced by a thick silence. Some people leaned forward, craning to see if this would finally be the breaking point, the moment when Emily would fold and leave in shame. Instead, Emily simply looked at George and Linda, holding their gaze without blinking or shifting her weight like she was ready to run. She said nothing, her silence somehow louder than any argument. Her face was calm, almost defiant, and the crowd felt that bold quiet more than if she had shouted. Suddenly the whole room seemed unsettled, unsure what would happen next. Samantha, seemingly emboldened by the crowd's earlier encouragement, stepped even closer to Emily. She reached out, her fingers brushing Emily's cardigan for a second. In time, her voice low but just loud enough to carry through the awkward silence, suggesting that Emily ought to leave now before she became the family's main joke. Samantha's words floated over the group like a challenge. For a moment, it seemed every eye in the Anderson living room was fixed on the two women. The look on Samantha's face was one of smug confidence, and several cousins exchanged approving glances and gave tiny nods, silently rooting for her to finish what had been started. Yet Emily did not budge. She neither stepped back nor dropped her gaze. If anything, her stillness became more noticeable, drawing in the curiosity of the entire crowd. The evening's luxury, the gold-framed paintings, the high ceilings, the sparkling chandeliers, suddenly felt like a stage for something much more honest than all the shows of wealth. In that instant, the room changed. Where once it was about showing off, it became a place thick with unspoken judgment. Emily's refusal to leave made everyone question their own part in the spectacle. even if only for the briefest second, and the air was heavy with something none of them could quite name. Suddenly, the heavy air in the living room was broken by the sound of firm footsteps echoing across the polished wood floor. In walked Mr. Bennet, the family's longtime attorney. With his sharp suit and careful movements, he brought with him a different kind of authority, one everyone in the Anderson family seemed to recognize. The moment he appeared, conversations died off in mid-sentence and laughter was swallowed whole. He held up a thick, cream-colored envelope marked with a bright red wax seal. There was no mistaking what it was, the last will and testament of Uncle Charles, whose passing had drawn everyone here to the big house on Nob Hill. Mr. Bennet moved calmly to the front of the room, glancing over the sea of anxious faces. The cousins who had been bold a minute earlier grew quiet, and even Samantha let her hand fall away from Emily's cardigan. All eyes followed the envelope as Mr. Bennet laid it gently on the table, but not a single person looked Emily's way. It was as if she had vanished behind the marble column, her presence pushed even further into the background. Standing with her back pressed lightly to the cool stone, Emily watched in silence. The spotlight was now on the envelope, and everyone else's hearts, it seemed, were pounding for themselves alone. When Mr. Bennet finally broke the seal and unfolded the will, the quiet was almost heavy enough to feel. His voice, clear and steady, cut through the silence as he began to read Uncle Charles's final wishes. At first, every person in the room appeared perched on the edge of their seat, hanging on every word. Most in the Anderson family had spent their lives convinced that their last name alone would open doors, buy houses on the best blocks of San Francisco, and guarantee an easy future. Now, with the lawyer's speech echoing off the high ceilings, that confidence seemed to waver. As Mr. Bennet recited the opening lines, the mood shifted. Each phrase brought more confusion. No mention of houses, no stock portfolios, no old cars, no paintings. Line after line, it became clear Uncle Charles had left no property or money to anyone gathered there. First came a rustling, tiny movements, as people looked around, not quite believing what they were hearing. The cousin who'd cracked jokes, the relatives who'd raised their glasses earlier, all seemed to shrink in their seats. The silence grew deep and unsettling, as if the whole room had to relearn how to breathe. The self-assurance that marked these family gatherings faded, replaced by an unmistakable shock and a quiet, uneasy fear. But then, just as the discomfort was settling into the cracks of the Anderson family pride, Mr. Bennet paused for a breath and read out the final provision. He announced that the entire estate, every penny, every piece of property, every painting, every share, would go to a single beneficiary. The room seemed to hold its breath, as if time itself stood still for a second. When he spoke Emily's name, the effect was immediate and powerful, the one moment in the evening when every jaw truly dropped. Her name echoed off the stone walls, louder than any outburst, shattering the expectations everyone had walked in with. Suddenly, all those cold stares and dismissive smirks turned into shocked, almost frightened expressions. People who had avoided looking at Emily for most of the night now stared straight at her, eyes wide and searching. For the first time, she was not invisible, not the outsider, not the subject of their mocking whispers, but the person holding every card. The cousins who had openly laughed, Linda and George with their harsh questions, Samantha and her sly jokes, every single one of them now saw her in a completely different light. All at once, the sense of certainty and superiority they had carried vanished, replaced with the raw realization that everything they believed to belong to them had slipped through their fingers. Mr. Bennet cleared his throat and took out a neat stack of documents from his leather briefcase, setting them on the table for all to see. He held up the marriage certificate, reading out the official details that listed Emily and Uncle Charles as husband and wife. Nobody could argue with the crisp paper or the seal from City Hall, Next came a spread of photographs showing Emily and Charles together at dinner parties, parks, and family gatherings, moments hidden from the rest of the Andersons, frozen, now for any doubter to see. When Mr. Bennet revealed the thick envelope of bank statements and love letters, the family could practically feel the evidence landing one heavy hit after another. And then, with a small smile, Mr. Bennet reached for a remote and started playing the wedding video on the television mounted above the fireplace. There it was, clear as day, Emily in her dress, Charles smiling, and familiar faces in the crowd, Aunt Marie and old Mr. Jacobs both waving to the camera as they stood as witnesses. For those who had whispered rumors or thrown around accusations, there was nowhere left to hide. The room grew even more silent than before, each person caught in a thick mix of shame and resignation, knowing there was no turning back from the truth. With every eye still trained on her, Emily finally stepped away from the shadow of the column and faced the room. She waited just a moment, long enough that everyone understood she had something to say. When her voice broke the silence, it was quiet but steady, clear enough for the entire Anderson family to hear. She said she had not come for any of the money or the grand house. Instead, Emily told them she came to see for herself who among them had truly cared for Uncle Charles and who had just been counting on the inheritance. Each word seemed to hang in the air a little longer than the last, landing on people who could barely look back at her. As she spoke, it was impossible for anyone to hide behind small talk or rehearsed smiles. It was like every sentence chipped away at the layers of pretense everyone had worn into the Anderson house that evening. No one tried to argue or explain, not even Samantha, who just stared at the floor. For a few minutes, the grand hall felt colder and strange, far from the welcoming place the family always claimed it to be. The embarrassment settled over the group, heavy and obvious, and in that moment the truth of what they valued was beyond denying. As the weight of Emily's words settled in, the rest of the Andersons barely moved. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others stared down at their hands or out the window, and nobody dared to meet Emily's steady gaze. She did not rush, but instead explained why she had stayed quiet until now. Emily spoke about how she had watched each of them, not just that night, but at every holiday dinner and every family event over the years. She pointed out how easily some people dismissed her in conversations, the hasty glances or the cold smiles when Uncle Charles was not around. Emily even recalled the specific times when harsh words were whispered behind her back, thinking she did not hear. Little by little, she described small moments, the way George had laughed at her shoes that Thanksgiving, or how Linda never bothered to include her in group photographs. Her calm voice did not accuse with anger, but with honesty, holding up a clear mirror to the room. Suddenly, it was not Emily who looked exposed, but all those who had claimed to belong at the center of this family. In that room, once so full of pride and expectation, a strange quiet took over, as if every corner now demanded the Andersons face up to who they really were. The room had fallen into the kind of silence that makes time feel slower. Just when it seemed that nothing else could possibly shake the Andersons, Emily quietly reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek, black remote. With a press of her thumb, the television screen flickered back to life. At first, everyone expected another family video or perhaps a last message from Uncle Charles. But this time, what appeared was a live feed, the unmistakable face of Uncle Charles himself, alive and well, looking back at his relatives from somewhere sunny and bright, maybe a small cottage along the California coast. The effect was instant. Some people actually froze in mid-breath, others sat up a little taller, and one or two even gasped out loud. For months, everyone had assumed Charles was gone for good. Yet there he was, sharp as ever, eyes sweeping over the stunned gathering, as if he could see straight through each of them. He waited while the shock sank in, then addressed his family with a steady, serious tone. Charles said he had watched every moment unfold, every cruel remark, and every show of real kindness. With clear disappointment, he spoke about how wealth and status had blinded the people he once trusted. He finished by saying the real legacy he cared about was not money or houses, but character and truth. After a pause that seemed to last forever, Uncle Charles continued, his tone steady but with a disappointment that weighed on everyone. He explained that the entire will reading had been a setup, a way to bring out everyone's true colors and see who cared about family and who was only interested in money. One by one, he called out the people who had made Emily's life difficult. He named George, Linda, Samantha, Mark, Thomas, and Evelyn, describing what each had said and done over the past several months. Each name was spoken slowly, so there was no mistaking who he meant. Charles didn't sugarcoat his words. He told them directly that because of their actions, they would no longer receive anything from the family's wealth or hold any special privileges. What struck everyone most was not just that they were cut off financially, but that the decision was so public and final. No room for argument, no chance at changing his mind. The rest of the family sat in stunned silence, understanding that the real consequence went far beyond money. For those named, it was a kind of exile. They were now outsiders, seen differently by everyone who had witnessed this moment unfold right there in what used to be their home. The moment Uncle Charles finished, Mr. Bennett, his trusted lawyer, stood up near the mantel for everyone to see. In a clear, measured voice, he confirmed everything that Charles had said. He went over the additional clauses in the will, explaining that there would be no loopholes and no last-minute changes. His words made it clear that those who were named would not be able to claim a single dollar, property, or any family connection tied to Charles's estate. Not now, and not in the future. People barely had time to let that settle when a pair of security guards, dressed in the crisp uniforms of the Anderson family's longtime service, entered the grand living room. George, Linda, Samantha, Mark, Thomas, and Evelyn shifted awkwardly in their seats. Finally, standing when asked, the guards quietly guided them toward the door, their footsteps echoing off the marble floors. No one cried out or protested. The rest of the family just watched, some straight-faced, others not even making eye contact. There was none of the usual sympathy or second chances that so often filled family arguments. As the doors closed behind the last of the group, a different feeling filled the house. For once, the main hall of the Anderson estate on Lake Michigan felt lighter, almost as if justice itself had swept through and cleared the air that had long been heavy with secrets and resentment. Once the room was cleared of those who had failed the test, Uncle Charles's expression changed. He looked softly into the camera, addressing the three people who had been so quiet throughout the whole ordeal: Ben, Laura, and Alice. These three had always been the background figures at family gatherings, the ones who offered a hand when nobody was watching and who never joined in the sharp words or the gossip. They were often overlooked, but they had always acted with kindness and respect, even when it seemed like nobody cared. Charles smiled, his face warming as he spoke about them. He said that Ben, Laura, and Alice would not only receive full family rights and a share of the estate, but would also hold a place by his side in the charitable projects that Emily would now lead. For once, the spotlight was on people whose character had been steady and true, rather than loud or flashy. Tears welled up in Laura's eyes, and even Ben seemed lost for words, mumbling his thanks. Alice simply nodded, her face bright with a quiet happiness. For the first time in years, the great room at the Anderson house felt friendly and hopeful, filled with a sense of warmth and belonging that nobody had expected. Emily stepped forward, her footsteps quiet on the polished wood. She moved straight to Ben, Laura, and Alice, not with the formality that so often hung in the Anderson house, but with an open, genuine smile. She held out her hand first to Ben. He hesitated for just a second, then shook her hand firmly. Laura and Alice soon joined, all of them forming a small, close circle together. It was not the kind of moment you see in movies. No grand speeches, no swelling music, just four people honestly recognizing one another. For the first time, it did not matter that Emily had once been the help, or that the others had started as staff or distant relatives. Class, work titles, and old barriers just faded. If anything, what truly counted now was simple decency, the small choices each had made to treat others well when no one was watching. Their hands met in the middle, all different yet equal, and something seemed to settle among them, a silent promise to stand by each other. The main hall, which hours earlier echoed with tension and harsh words, now felt calm. Those old walls had witnessed arguments and judgment. Now they watched as a new kind of family began to grow, one held together by kindness and truth, not just blood or inheritance. As sunlight poured into the grand room, touching the old rugs and brightening every corner, Emily slowly made her way back toward the center. Uncle Charles's image still filled the large television screen set up near the fireplace. Even though he was miles away in his California cottage, it felt like the distance hardly mattered now. Emily and Charles looked at one another across the room and the screen, sharing a long moment that held years of memories, some sweet, some bitter, all real. Their eyes met, and in that look, so much was said without needing words. There was pain over what had happened, but also hope for what could come next. Emily reached out and rested her hand gently against the screen, right where Charles's hand appeared on his side. For a second, it was as if they actually touched, a small comfort after so much change and misunderstanding. Charles nodded, his face softening, and the two smiled quietly. The silence said everything, bringing them peace after so much conflict. Through that single gentle gesture, both found a way to move forward. The room stayed peaceful and bright, as if every shadow had been swept away, making space for forgiveness and a new beginning for both of them. Just as the quiet settled around them, a side door eased open on silent hinges. There, to everyone's surprise, stood Uncle Charles himself, not on a screen now, but right in the middle of the room in Chicago, looking just the same as always, maybe a bit older, with more lines marking his face. He did not wear a fancy suit or come with dramatic flair. He just walked straight toward Emily with honest eyes and no hesitation. For a moment, it felt like time stood still while they met at the center of the big hall. Without saying a word, Charles reached for Emily's hand and she took it. Together, with their family and friends quietly watching, they stepped side by side through the wide doorway at the front of the house. There was no dramatic music, no crowd waiting outside, only the slow, warm light of early morning wrapping around them. The anger and shame of the past were left behind, replaced by a real sense of hope and a promise to live in a simpler, fairer way. Charles and Emily did not need to announce any plans. By walking forward together, their message was clear. From then on, kindness and honesty would guide the family. No one in that house would ever have to bow their head to pride or cruelty again.